Understanding how to simplify the figure is key to being able to draw poses that look believable. I'm going to walk you through my process of mannequinization of the figure, starting with a gesture drawing and constructing simplified forms on top of that. Here's my gesture start, so simple sphere, and then from here I'm going to develop my gesture based on 16 to 17 lines. Gesture can be a whole subject in of itself. I would say the simple things or the things to think about here would be every line to me is simplifying the directional aim of a part, and then the spacing in between lines are always the joint. So we have our front view, front 3/4, but some more challenging angles and positions for this one. Here's my gestures. You can see the weight's higher on this left side. I'm wrapping lines for that. Here's my rib cage, head, of course, wrapping lines for that too. So this leg's pretty straight here. Gesture for that. Get my proportion. You can see in a view like that for the foot, you could use those same perspectives we talk about, but just foreshorten them a bit more. And then what I like about this other leg is look how it creates this big C curve off that large stretch in the front of the body. I always look for these, and the more passive parts of the body, just finding those longer relational rhythms always looks nice to me. So here's the arms crossing the body this way. I see that just the elbow peeking out on this side, back and up. I don't think I'm going to do too much to change the pose in terms of the design. That would be the gesture for the hand. And then again, like thinking about that long rhythm we talked about for the front down to the leg, I use that. That's a great opportunity to do this arm too. How that would come up, and then that cool, like the last moment, like the hand changes. That just becomes now one long S curve for that passive side. Now let's do our tilts. So this goes up, this goes against that, and then head and neck, continue that directional balance. If it helps, sometimes what I think about is if I'm doing my gesture, where the pit of the neck is always really useful to me. So let's say we have like this kind of same gesture over here, but let's keep it like a little simpler just for time. So that would be the basic management of the figure to the weight-bearing leg. So if you want to play around with the balance of your poses, I'll look for the pit of the neck. And then if you just plumb that straight down, if you find that that's near to the weight-bearing ankle, that means that you have a pretty stable pose. So like if I just drop this on the photograph, look how close it is to that medial malleolus or ankle. That's useful because if you don't want a balanced pose, then you could change it. So I'm just aware of that. And my kind of default is that I always push it more or less so that I don't really like a lot of balanced poses or overly balanced poses. So kind of pushing, you can see on this, that I over exaggerated to the point where I moved it off the ankle. That would be kind of more gestural related or information pertaining more to gesture, but that's something you might want to consider at this stage just for the quality, the type of pose that you're producing. Now I have my shapes are next. So pelvis is here, rib cage is here. Now I'm going to do connections. I think we could see on this that there's a really cool, really clean looking S curve for the neck on that side. So that's wrapping behind the head, overlapping the rib cage, and then its wrap here would be that slice, or I want the back of the rib cage to look to be just slightly higher than the front. And on this side, it would be pinched. Let's take another look at this head. That felt a little stiff to me. So maybe what I'd like instead is to see more of an angle going that way. That's even a little bit more tilted than what she currently has, but I prefer it. And all of this is to kind of impress the same point that my current view of poses and the way that I'm drawing, as far as what's presented here, is analyzing, interpreting, adjusting, making changes, thinking about the design, and less right now about copying, reproducing, looking carefully at tonal patterns and gradations. I don't have a bias against either one. I think they're just different tools, but that feels better to me. Whereas before it kind of felt like a little bit stiff in the neck. Now I'm going to do the pinch and stretch here, the torso. So this, I could really see a nice C curve as that rib cage pushes down on maybe the subcutaneous fat and the external oblique. So a T and then a wrap goes behind, goes in the front. And that's what the muscle does too. Then on this side, here I could see my rigid surface for the rib cage, get that full form. And then we have our S and then pull into the pelvis. So here I'm just kind of playing around with the spacing and then how this tucks back. So that'd be my kind of thinking about those gestural relationships between the core masses. Pelvis, rib cage, intersection. Next step is the symmetry line, landmarks. So pit of the neck. See if you can just find one line through belly button, pelvis. So that makes a big C curve that's closer to the right side of the figure. So anytime that line favors one side or the other, it means there's a directional rotation or a dimensional turn towards that side. This is a tip that I use a lot. So when you're doing that, anytime you see that, it means that it's a 3/4 turn. Anytime there's a C curve relationship between pit of the neck to pelvis through belly button, that means that ultimately by the time you're done developing these, both your rib cage and pelvis will be boxes, and you'll see some degree of a side plane, and that they'll probably proportionally share the planes, the width of the front, the width of the side. Here's the trick. People always struggle in my classes with twists. So twists wouldn't be a C curve, it would be an S curve. So the symmetry line of the ribcage is facing one direction, and the S comes when the pelvis starts to go the opposite direction, and that tugs that line into the S at the bottom, so that goes this way. If we interpret a twist based off of that, what it means is you'd have a rib cage looking like this, and that would be facing this way, and then the pelvis would be facing the opposite way. So you'd have, instead of boxes that are sharing that proportion, you'd have this. So rib cage goes this way, pelvis goes that way. I think the easiest way to manage a twist is in the intersections. Best way to manage twists is to do two triangles that are asymmetrical. So on this side, you would have a triangle that's fatter at the bottom and then narrowing and overlapping to the top. And so that would show that this part of the oblique is coming across and forward on that pelvis, but the top where it connects on the side of the rib cage is still back there out of view. The other side is going to be triangles fat here, because that muscle would be attaching all the way across the side plane. And then that tapers and narrows to the side of the pelvis that's turning away that we don't see. So you get one triangle, top heavy, other triangle, bottom heavy. And then in the middle, the plane that would be the abdomen normally, this would be, you could think of this as, if it helps, as an S. But the easiest way, I think, to reconcile the twist is just to think that that area, the midsection, is always a continuation of planes. So all you have to really figure out is where the planes are beginning and ending, and then you could just manage the more explicit planes to connect them. Kind of that's the S, and then how I would change the perspective so that the ribcage faces one way, the pelvis another, and then how to make it feel like it's maybe natural or organic at the areas of the midsection with those triangles and then that winding S plane in the middle. So here's our C curve. If we just back up to what I was saying, that's a C curve that relates all my landmarks through the belly, to the pelvis, sternum. You could see the 10th rib pretty well. So one thing that's important when you're doing these landmarks to get your boxes is always make sure that one of these landmarks is in the inside of the egg, because that's what you're using as a point of reference to carve into it. And then maybe the as-is point is here and here. And notice that I'm trying to keep those parallel to the tilt so I don't contradict that. Now let's make a box from these. So a box will look like width, depth, height. Maybe this could be one, because of her bend, that we could use the top of the box. But we've done under the box the whole time. So let's just explore, see how that looks. Remember, my rule for the front is always that you always show the ribcage from underneath. But this doesn't look too bad. So just to make an exception, this looks like a pose where she's kind of moving her arms in a way where that feels like it could be this could be the top plane of the shoulders. But as far as how it organizes the plane break of the ribcage pelvis, it doesn't bother me. So that I think would be fine. And then we could do our pelvis, find a depth, find a height, find a width, and then copy paste. Remember, all you have to worry about is that each line that's similar or the same go parallel to each other. So all my width, depth, and height need to be parallel. I'm just going to drop this down. I'm just making a plane out of that intersection, just dropping it down from the corner of the rib cage to the corner of the pelvis.
So this lesson that you're watching now comes from Michael Hampton's course, Intro to Figure Construction, which you can find at prokka.com/Hampton. Michael's next course on head drawing and construction is available for pre-sale with a discount. And if you get it now, you can bundle both courses together for even more savings. And that's over at prokka.com/Hampton.
Now, legs. The one thing I don't do, and I'm just going to share it with you in case you like it, you can, but for me it always presents a later obstacle, is I think a lot of people use the cylinders to assess and try to match the contour of a part. Like here, the example would be for women. If we recognize that at the top of the leg, it feels thicker than at the narrow of the knee, people will use a tapered cylinder here. I don't like that for me because it's not all one thing, right? What I'm using the cylinder here to represent is the direction of the bone and the perspective of that bone. And then I would want to add the muscle and then add the subcutaneous fat that would make it feel feminine. If you collapse those things early on, like muscle, fat, it could be misleading. The other detriment would be if you use a construction stage like this to then move into stacking muscles on top. And if you vary the width of your cylinders, narrow to thick, then you have to adjust for the different sizes of muscles so that they don't affect the contour, because if you're already building on a thicker part of a cylinder, so it just gets confusing to me. But it works really well for like character invention if you're looking to create different body types and you're already kind of comfortable with the anatomy in a way where you can play around with it and squash and stretch it, then I think it's fine. But from like this process standpoint, which is mostly what I'm focusing on here, I wouldn't do it. So here's gesture and kind of construction for this lower leg. And in this one, could use that same trick, just kind of drop the gesture of the knee because it's a pretty front view. Well, I don't see much of it because the leg's in front. But so what I would be doing or thinking about here is when I drew these rhythm lines down from the width of the knee, that creates a width, and then this gets wider in the back. So I dropped that egg in the back, so that would be the calf. And that's that gold bar idea, the thin to thick of a form. Let's do a little quick study of that foot while we're here. So remember, after we get the sock, the ankle grabs a wrench. The wrench wraps and overlaps onto the sphere. Deck of cards comes forward there. And then now I'm just using that same shape and I'm going to foreshorten it. This is the slide that we looked at. That's the metatarsus of the foot. Hits the ground. Open face is where the toes would go. And the back would be where the calcaneus bone is. But I'm designing a bridge. Your foot works on two arches, a long and a traverse. So the two things I want to get here is that there's this space in the middle. So it goes up and then down and then out. And then on the deck of cards part of the tarsus group, I'm peaking it so that it has that apex, because that would be an expression of the traverse or the side-to-side arch. And then here we could put, our toe, square, wide. So just use a couple boxes that are nested, one on top or in front of the other. And then the other smaller toes could be the gestural shape that turn into the stairs, and then the pinky off to the side. So that's like a pretty low investment little construction sketch, but it gives you enough in terms of like the perspective surfaces that maybe it would be something you could use to study feet and turn them around and see them from different angles. And then once you get this, then you could stack your padding over and on top. There's a little foot there, and that would be this one. This is the lay-in, the shape, and then that would be the constructive or construction-based exploration. And now for this one, let's erase some of this just so the foreshortening doesn't get in the way. It's going to come through here. So here's our cylinder. It's going to be more foreshortened, and that ends around here. And then I'm going to plane this. So this is where I see the knee, the landmark of the knee. So I'm going to make this a box just for fun. Something, since the other one's a cylinder. So that's here. This is the inside of the leg. So sartorius, adductors, vastus medialis would be in there. And then let's do the plane of the knee this way. So let's think of that as a whole cube too, if you want. And then from there, we could create a gestural line for tibia and let that flow into the foot. So build an S curve on the back, and that would be our calf, the back here, and then heel, and then toe. And then just making sure that stays in front and overlapped to the back or that rear leg. So we'll just take some of that away so you can see the clean shape. And then same thing, now that I have this knee for the lower leg, I could do the same thing by looking at that's the side, this is the front, and just use that to help track, muscle or light and shadow. Well, that's what I would think or use it for. So what we would have to add now would be the arms. So just creating those perspectives. This arm comes across the body, but I think it still comes towards us slightly. That's my best guess. So I'm going to say from here, maybe to here. And that would be our cylinder here. So let's say that. And then maybe we could do the same thing just for clarity. Just ease of trying to see how that moves in front. We could just wipe some of this back. So that's overlapping. And then if I create my forearm, the reason my drawings get so messy at times is I try to draw through, like I'm seeing all the sides or I'm trying to complete an ellipse. That's why I'll usually work with, layers in Photoshop, or when I'm sketching for myself, I like Prismacolors. You work from lighter colors to darker colors. And then we don't have to go into developing all the fingers, but let's at least lay in for the hand that like deck of cards, right? So like what would be helpful first would be to say, well, what's the angle that I see the forearm? I think that we would have our 2x4 here. That's the outside. This is the top. Remember, that's a key to getting a good understanding of the hand, because the hand doesn't ever get to leave these planes. So this would be the side of the palm coming this way. And then this is the top of the palm going across. And so that gives the hand a bit of a stretch and a pinch. So what is that? That's another connection. I could use a C-S curve in there to explain, just like I did every other connection. So that principle works everywhere. The eye, the muscles, the wrist, the ankle. And then, you could do your gestural, kind of map out what that gestural shape of the fingers would be from there, and then cut that up. Or just see that as a continuation of the plane. That's fine too at this stage. So that would be my hand. So you have upper arm, forearm, hand. And then for this one, I think the arm would be going up at this angle. So that's the humerus. I think the real trick is keeping the construction to be somewhat lyrical feeling still. It's really hard to do because it's like such a suffocating stage where everything is suffocating relative to the gesture, which is just all rhythm and flowing motion and, nice dynamic line work. And then on top of this, there's like this burden of perspective and shape. A good metric of how you're doing is if you can manage to keep the construction with some of those aspects or qualities. That also is largely why I always over-exaggerate my gestures, because I'm anticipating for some of this to stiffen it a bit. So there's upper arm there, and then maybe this one goes back. Let's just say it goes back. I don't know if that breaks the elbow or not, but go this way. And then what's this hand doing? Well, we could also make that a box. That's going away. And then, finger goes up. We could just do a gesture for the finger individual. Thumb. And there you go. That would be our kind of tilted figure with the foreshortened leg in front.
Go check out Michael's courses at Proko.com/Hampton. And if you want more free content, Michael did a series a while back on how to combine gesture and anatomy. That link is in the description.